Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Real Talk and ELT. I'm going to go into CELTA stuff today, this episode. So I want to talk about supporting candidates with lesson planning because, all right. Okay, here we go. Let me just organize my brain about this. So when candidates come into CELTA programs, they sometimes have some misconceptions and they need to do these magnificent, beautiful lesson plans. And it's just so creative and it's just blowing tutors' minds. I don't get impressed very often. Sometimes I do. Like there's highlight moments, but honestly, just like teaching is teaching, and everybody has their own style, so I'm okay with that. But in terms of helping people with lesson planning, one of the things that I've noticed is that people need support when it comes to feeling okay that they're doing the right thing. So mostly it's therapy sessions. Let's be honest, it's a lot of therapy. But really, it's that they're trying to figure out what is appropriate and what is not appropriate and how lessons should go. And a lot of CELTA candidates are always looking for like the formula. And there's not really a formula. There's not a perfect lesson, that doesn't exist, but there's certainly some guidance that we can provide. There's some structures and frameworks that help guide people through an effective lesson cycle, because that's the main point. And so when I do my general take as a tutor, listen, and it could be wrong. I don't know. I'm doing my best here. My general take is that I want people to have support when they're going through certain things. But I also know that many of these people, nice little motorcycle going by, many of these people either have no experience, have limited experience, and haven't done these kind of official training things, or they've got a lot of experience and not a lot of technical skills. So it's like you never know who kind of goes into these programs. One thing I like to do to help people get through this whole like what am I going to develop, what's my lesson plan going to be, is that different centers have different ways, but I think providing some support in terms of here's a lesson that most CELTAs do this. This is not out of the normal. It's not something that I created either, but I think it's helpful. Most centers, for the first couple lessons, we give candidates kind of step-by-step instructions. Do this. That's it. We're giving you the roadmap. You just got to drive down the street with it. You know what I mean? You just got to apply it, and that's it. To build their confidence a little bit, and so that they can focus on things that are immediately essential in running effective classes. Immediately essential would be classroom management. And classroom management looks different for a lot of different people, meaning how you're managing the students coming in and out of the classes, if people arrive late. The courses are online. Most people are teaching online too. So technical issues, can you use Zoom? Are you able to share your screen? Are you able to do all of these technical things? Send people to breakout rooms, bring them back from breakout rooms, give instructions. Like, I know it sounds like the basics, but we have to make sure that people can do the basics before we start doing anything else. If you can deliver the basics and then we just need to modify other things, then that's fine. But also, we need to remember CELTA is a stressful situation. They're in a course, they're being assessed. Sometimes people have never been observed before, which heightens the anxiety, we can say. Different people react differently. Listen, we gotta make it accessible for everyone. So I typically, when it comes to lesson planning throughout the course, I try to be very aware of how much information I'm giving to the candidates, how I'm phrasing it, and if I'm making it tangible for them. People want step-by-steps. And so teaching is not step-by-step, but as much as I possibly can modify the way that I deliver something, I think it's helpful for candidates. So first things first, classroom management. First lessons, I'm just worried about, can you be present in the class, deliver a lesson without any, let's say, impeding classroom management issues? Can you do that? If you can do that, great. So then we can kind of move on to the next step. But I'm not going to talk about all sorts of things. It's not that lessons are terrible either. It's that sometimes people have good instincts, sometimes they're not trained, sometimes they don't, for a variety of reasons. And we have to remember that CELTA, we're only focusing on, can you deliver lessons in the quote unquote acceptable criteria that Cambridge University has devised. Like, we have the criteria. That's at the end of the CELTA 5, the little booklet that you have that has all of the criteria there. And that's all we're assessing. That's it. I'm just seeing, like, are you meeting the criteria? So can they do classroom management first? So my feedback for lesson planning is usually I start with, like, most people need to script their instructions, because they start going off on tangents and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, depending, because you're going to be teaching at 2 levels, like an upper intermediate or intermediate level and a beginner level. And if you can't deliver clear, concise instructions for, like, lower level students, you just need to script them. Just script them. That's fine. Just leave it there. Let it be your support. It's fine. I did it during my CELTA. It helped me immensely, because as you can probably see, as I have my own podcast, I am chatty. I tend to speak a lot. So, I got to control that in a class, because classroom environment is different than podcast environment, is different than, training environment. It's different. So you have to control what you're doing there. So, not that TTT is bad. Teacher talking time is not bad. It's not bad, because you have to be a model for your students, and you have to give them instructions. You have to guide them through things. Useless TTT, rambling on, making little jokes that are just going to go above the student's head because you're anxious and you try to be funny and you want to develop rapport, and you think that the best way of developing rapport is to make a joke, and then everybody laughs, and then everybody's feeling calm. But really, you tell the joke and it's just over people's heads. You start laughing, and then they're like, what are they laughing at? I don't know what's going on. It's a mess. So usually, I'm like, just write it out. You don't have to read it off like a robot, but at least it's there. So if you start, derailing, just use it. And then I tried to give them classroom management tips. So, like, when it comes to lesson planning, because they have to turn in a formal lesson that has all of the steps and everything, I'm like, write down the steps. Your lesson plan should be something that if you don't show up, I can pick up and I can deliver the lesson exactly how you're planning it in your head. So put it down on paper. Sometimes, a lot of times, private teachers, even in teachers in institutions, they don't have to lesson plan. So they wing it a lot of times. And if you're winging it, you might not be applying techniques and things like that. In a situation where you're being observed and assessed, that might not be the best option. It's just a thought, so it's a little bit more of a technical course. Like, we want to give you the teaching skills to be able to get through things. One of those teaching skills is classroom management. Can you set up tasks, give instructions, use the tools and technology that you need to be able to use? Can you do these basic things? And then we can start moving on from there. So that's usually like round 1 of lesson planning. I just focus on classroom management, because if you can't do that, doesn't matter what I tell you about anything else, you're not able to manage the class and the students. So that's round 1. Round 2, then I usually start talking about techniques. Because Cambridge CELTA is focused on language teachers, English language teachers, one of the key core ideas for me is that you need to be able to clarify language. If you're unable to clarify language, I'm not sure how you're going to succeed as a language teacher. So that then becomes one of my big focuses of once we've got classroom management down in that terms of lesson planning, then we start focusing on, okay, can you clarify language? Can you prepare a language analysis that supports you, materials, visuals that support you delivering clear language clarification so that students understand and then can start using to some degree of accuracy? Is that within the realm of possibility for you right now? Because that's, if you're a language teacher, something going on outside. The gang of neighborhood dogs is running amok. If you're a language teacher, being able to explain language is the next logical step. Can you be in the classroom? Yes. Okay. Now, can you be in the classroom and explain language? Great. So then we usually go through techniques and how to prepare things and talking about materials, logical steps of being able to clarify language, techniques like ECDB, things like that. So can you do this? Is the language clear? It is? Awesome. So now you're able to sequence things, think about interaction, give set up activities, give instructions, and clarify language. Awesome. Next step, like I do this in rounds because I feel like CELTA candidates are very anxious and they want to do everything perfectly. And it's like, no, the course is really about your growth over a period of time. And I'm not going to give you, I'm just not going to get information dump on you at the beginning of your course and be like, survive, good luck. Like that's really unfair. So then, okay. So now we have this. Then I move into usually talking about, and this is kind of in conjunction, like language clarification and stages of lessons and why we do things one way or another and what's the benefit of doing it in one order or reversing that order and how that changes and blah, blah, blah. So language clarification and staging, meaning what's the most logical way to stage a lesson? Why do we do things in the way that we do them? Why do we have this order of stages? What can we substitute here? What's a good and a digestible way for students to move through a lesson? We talk a lot about contextualization and making sure the context stays consistent throughout the lessons, etc. So there's a lot of good stuff there in terms of talking about skills, talking about subskills, talking about strategy, training questions, and helping students with strategies to be able to practice subskills appropriately, clarifying language, sequencing things, what is an appropriate task for each stage and what's not an appropriate task. Really digging into the aim of this stage is X, Y, and Z. And so this is why we create this type of activity for that. And then we build on the knowledge or discussion and move into more complex things or more abstract things or etc. So we have those conversations. So then, okay, so that's kind of like stage 2 to 3-ish. So can you be in a classroom? Can you set up activities? Can you give instructions? Can you clarify language? Can you support students through staging and scaffolding, through appropriately developed activities, thinking about what's the aim of this? How is it going to tie into the next thing? Can you contextualize everything? And then from there, if they've kind of gotten that all under their belts, then we go into letting them loose. Now you know some of the rules. This is not all of the rules. This is a 120-hour course. This is a limited course. Yes, it is for it's an initial certification. This is not, but from what you've learned, from what you've been practicing, from what you can apply effectively and consistently in your lessons, then typically I just kind of let them loose and say, all right, now do it. Do it on your own. Do it with less help. Try to do it without me. Try to get through planning without having me there holding your hand and getting through things. Like you do it and see how it goes. Because it's one thing to have everything kind of planned out, or tips and me always available via email and messenger and stuff like that. And it's another thing of saying, okay, now I'm going to do it. I'm going to try and replicate what we were doing, and I'm going to design my own materials. I'm going to use authentic materials. I'm going to adapt what we have in the course books, because we always have course books available for candidates to use for their lesson. So it's kind of like, then they do it. And that kind of brings out a whole new set of problems, because it seems that they usually get it when it's there and they just have to follow and apply. But then the creation part of it, I mean, I guess if we look at Bloom's taxonomy too, like, like being educators and all, then when they have to create it themselves, sometimes there's doubt, misapplication of things. Sometimes people overlook minor details in terms of creating a dynamic that works in the class. They forget the simplest of things, which would be like classroom management issues. So it's funny because they've kind of gotten in there, like really applying it and doing well with all of the support. And then you start removing the support, and then the problems go back to classroom management because they don't have the support anymore. So they're trying to balance all of these things. We've incrementally built them up, and then it's like juggling all of those aspects. So one time things like this happen. Use your own material, use authentic material, create your own lesson. And then they create something and they want students to interact in a specific way. And the way that they set up the materials, the visuals, it's not clear. And then the students, instead of speaking, they start writing their answers. Which is the funniest thing, because they've done, like, classroom management is something they've done in the past, and then it's like, I didn't want them to, I don't know why they did. It's just like, it's okay, calm down, just go back to classroom management. How did you set up the task? Were you clear with the instructions? Was the time limit that you gave the students to be able to complete the test too long? You extended it too long because you wanted them to have enough thinking time, but instead of thinking time, it turned into writing time. That happens. That's not like it's not, okay, it's an unintended occasion that happens in your class, but that's okay. You can just correct it, or you can roll with it and be like, okay, next time I need to change that because they're already midway through doing something. So let me just let them finish and figure out how I can bring it back to where I was going. So yeah, I think it's just, when it comes to like lesson planning, you try to give candidates as much support as they need, like lots of support in the beginning, focusing on just certain things so that they feel they have the handle, they have control over it. Like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm supposed to do at least. And then you let them loose, and then they have to go almost, this has been my experience. Again, I can only tell you what I've experienced. It's almost like they go back through all of those stages that you brought them to. Because the first things they forget about, because the last stuff is what is fresh in their mind and it's what they're focused on, and then they forget some of the basics. And this is why the CELTA course and courses similar to it are interesting, because it doesn't matter if you've been teaching for like 15, 20 years, going back to a course like that, or something similar, a similar dynamic, or, just kind of refreshing. It brings back things and makes you reanalyze and like, okay, because we get kind of stuck into whatever's the flavor of the moment, the topic of the moment. That's kind of where all of our lessons are always hyper focused on that and integrating, whatever you're doing in your private practice. But it's bringing you back to, let's consider, let's consider how we do these things. Let's consider the alternatives. Let's consider the variations of what we do here. Even something simple as classroom management. Like how many different ways can you set up a task? How many different ways can you give instructions and make sure that students know how to successfully complete that task? I mean, and if you're doing it the same way all the time, is that route and routine and is that boring for students? Is there a way for us to I'm always concerned about being patronizing, especially because I teach adults. I teach adults that are quite successful in their careers and in their jobs. So I always think about, I mean, it's so weird that I'm always like, how do I explain this to them without it sounding like they're in a class? Because that's one of the complaints that I've gotten from students, not my students, because I tried to like really consider this wholeheartedly, like a lot. I don't know why I focus on this. I never want to be patronizing to my students and for them to feel like this is like a little class in school, like I'm back in grade school again. Because I think that's frustrating for people. Like that's super frustrating to be like, I've achieved so much in my life. I'm in my career and I'm doing a good job, making money. I'm in a good position, or, I finally feel comfortable where I am in life, just in life. And then kind of, it's a humbling thing to be in a language classroom, to not be able to communicate, to feel as if you have the communication skills of a toddler. Because I, if anybody who's learned a language, like you feel that way, it's like, I feel like I should have a diaper on at this point because I cannot, you have complex thoughts and then you can't express them and it's frustrating. So classroom management, I know people breeze over it in terms of, instructions and setting up tasks and the way that things look and the way that we create the materials and the visuals for them to understand language clarification. I know that we kind of just breeze over that, throw it into a table and it's fine. But actually, I find those things to have some of the most impact on students because, especially if you're teaching adults, it's a hard thing to come down sometimes and be like, I'm a beginner at this. And not a lot of people consider that, like those feelings of being shy and anxious and all of that. I think is kind of related to how you manage your class. It's just my perspective. So that's why I always start there. I think it's a thing that you can control the most. I think it's the thing that's most important. And then from there, then you can think of all these great ideas and changing dynamics and doing all this stuff and constructing your own, style and developing the activities. But I also think that you have to think about how those basic interactions make students feel. In accepting that, to become an expert, you have to be comfortable being a beginner. But they don't have to be comfortable being patronized with, like, instructions are the thing that I find to be most patronizing sometimes. And especially in courses that are like formal courses like this, where we say, okay, we need you to practice doing, not only setting up, giving instructions, but also checking the instructions to make sure that it's very clear for the students what they need to do. Like instruction ICQs, instruction checking questions. Whew, I struggle with those. I find those to be annoying. But you have to do it because you have to make sure that your student knows what they need to do. At the same time, it's like, how can I make this so it's not childish for adult learners? Like if I tell you in 5 minutes, how long do you have to do the activity? Like that's so patronizing sometimes. Like if it were me, I'd be like, 5 minutes, you just said it. Like, come on. So finding different ways and being aware that you're teaching people, you're not just, following some sort of script. That's why scripting is good sometimes, but you have to be careful not to sound like a robot or to sound like, a teacher in grade school. Anyways, so in terms of lesson planning, that's how I tend to look at it. and giving teachers and candidates support in lesson planning, I like to start from the basics. How are you running the class? Is it effective? Are students getting confused? How are they feeling in terms of how you're setting up and doing activities? And then we can dive into the activities. What's the most effective way? For me, if you're a language teacher and you can't clarify language, I don't know what you're doing in the classroom. So like that's then that after being in the classroom and being able to run a classroom, the second thing is that, is that you need to be able to clarify language, because if you can't clarify language, you don't know your subject matter good enough to be a teacher of it. So then you can go into all of the different variations and how you can set things up and staging stuff. And that's just logical in my brain. So when I'm doing CELTAs, when I'm tutoring them, when I'm working with the candidates, even when I'm working with teachers outside, and they say that they need some support with their lesson plans or delivery of lessons, like that's kind of the way that I go, because that's what I believe and that's what I think about it. So that's that. That's how I give, and it might be different for everybody else. Listen, to each his own. But that's how I go about supporting teachers through the lesson planning process. I typically like to go topic by topic and help them along the way. Digestible, bite-size pieces of information, and not stretching over too many categories. Because I think if you try to fix everything, like if you give a disaster of a lesson, happens. If you give a disaster of a lesson and I give you all the corrections that you need to make, I guarantee the next lesson is going to be a disaster, because you're just like so scatterbrained about making corrections. So it's like, just make the corrections manageable, bite size. Let's work on this first, then we'll work on that, then because that's the nature of how I like to do tutoring for those professional courses. And that's it. If you have any questions, I'll probably go into more like the lesson plan, actual lesson plan, but that's how I like to support teachers getting through lesson plans. And I think it makes it easier for them to tackle and see different levels in terms of when I give them feedback. We're not just all over the place. It's very structured and manageable. That's it. I'm gonna go. Otherwise, I'll just continue to blabble about here. And I'll be back. So thank you for listening. See you soon.